Want to take a second here and dive in. Mr. Cruz, you've done great work kind of walking through the cost of a lot of the regulations that are put out. I'm going to jump, though. I want to ask Mr. Talem and Mr. Ray, pulling from your experience at OIRA, how should Congress address major rules when they're already final, but the financial impact of the rule isn't realized until years after the regulation is final?
So I would say Congress has already taken steps to achieve that objective by requiring retrospective review, but retrospective review could be enhanced quite significantly. Under the Small Business Regulatory Flexibility Act, agencies are required, with respect to major rules, to go back several years after issuance of the rule and assess the impacts and continued need for the regulation. But agencies regularly skirt that requirement. Congress could do much more to give teeth to the requirement and make the agencies basically participate in that process more robustly.
Thank you, Mr. Tullum.
So along those lines, one proposal that I worked on when I was in the Senate was a bipartisan proposal that would require, as part of the rulemaking itself, a prospective plan to look back within a fixed number of years and conduct that retrospective review, right? So it's not just a future promise, it's actually part of the rule itself has to contain this plan to say within, say, 5 years, the agency will look at the following data, these indicators, to determine to the degree to which the rule is accomplishing both their goal and meeting the intent of Congress. I would also note that we get a little bogged down, I think everyone, in that policymaking is Congress goes first, and then there's this agency action, and then maybe there's a court action later. But it's actually circular, and it's actually a process, and it's not just handing off one. So I spoke to a group of congressional staff on Friday about what this means for their job. Congressional staff should be engaged from the beginning with the agency and not waiting for a proposal to go public.
So I'm going to build on that. So Mr. Kosar, in your opening remarks, you referenced kind of building out the Congressional Research Office. I'm thinking of other ways that we can pull current staff into this work rather than simply just throwing more money at the problem. Give me a little more color on that idea, what that would look like. Or are there areas where we could pull from inside the federal employee group currently rather than simply allocating additional resources and hiring more people?
Boy, I wish I could point to some legislative branch support agency personnel and say these folks are not doing enough and they should be repurposed to this more important thing, which is super, super important. But I just can't. You know, when I looked at the numbers amongst the legislative branch, civil servants who help with policy or related matters, the number of them has gone down since the 1980s, but the federal government's expanse and the regulatory state's gone up, and so like I just can't figure out how to repurpose.
Understood. Does anyone else have an area where they might be able to pull from? We have 2.2 million non-military federal employees. It seems like we should be thinking about an avenue, and if not, I would charge you to all sharpen our pens and to think about inside the rulemaking administrative state whether or not we can reallocate some of those resources back into the congressional side. Mr. Cruz, I'll give it very briefly. And then
well, just quickly, you were talking about retrospective review. One thing that would force that is if you did some form of sunsetting, which has some bipartisan pedigree that we talked about, and that would help you figure out where you think you actually need to regulate things. You've got economic, social, health and safety, paperwork costs, and things like that. So that would force you to look at some of those things, perhaps, and then decide where you ought to regulate. And then remember, most regulations aren't written yet, so unfortunately. So one thing you can think about is what the workloads are in the future. And as Congress takes on more of the authority with writing statutes that are directed the way you want, that helps you too in thinking about what you do on the retrospective basis.
Thank you very much.